probably the key thing that I've learned in business over the years, that the most powerful and profitable tool you have in business is yourself. And the one thing that can really bring you unstuck quickly is yourself. So a lot of the struggle I had in business was overcome when I took time to understand how I best operate, and then expanded that out to understand how the significant people around me, my family and my team, operated. And when we were able to put that all together, we were able to have sustainable business growth and enjoyable business growth. Okay, these will be brief, but I grew up in a rural property in southeast Queensland called the Granite Belt. My backyard was 200 acres of granite rock, and we had no financial security, but we had no limits to imagination. In this photo, which I really treasure, is my cousin Joan, who's now one of the first female magistrates in Queensland. John, who's a doctor in Bundaberg. My sister Judy isn't there yet, but she went on to get the Conspicuous Service Medal for the Air Force with 9/11 for Australia. And my brother David, who is a debt-free farmer, which is quite a rare occurrence in Australia. I've had a very exciting journey, filled with quality relationships, and that, in hindsight, is also such a powerful tool. One thing with my personality, which over the years I realise has driven people nuts, is I would often ask that question, why not? Why does it have to be this way? You know, this doesn't seem logical or fair to me. One such circumstance in my past was that my mother enrolled me in Girl Guides, which, nothing against Girl Guides, but it was boring and unchallenging. Whereas all of the boys in our community were in Scouts, which were having a lot more fun than we were having. So my cousin and I asked the question, why can't we join Scouts? So we went on to be some of the very first Girl Scouts in Australia. I don't believe in the glass ceiling for women. I was told that term a few years ago and went, what are you on about? I have never been in an environment where I saw anything was there to impede me but myself. And when it came to the Scouts, we just excelled and we had a tremendous time. We knew, though, we had to do it very well, so it became established in Australia. Also, my life has been full of opportunities. Usually started with a challenge. I didn't do well at school. My parents couldn't afford to send me to university, and so I went nursing. And I loved nursing because I now know I'm a very systematic person. I'm very good at developing procedures, and so surgical procedures, hospital procedures were just so easy for me. It was the first time in my life I'd found something academic that was easy. Also during this time, I went on a blind date because growing up on a rural property, I'd learnt to drive and drive quite well on dirt sideways by about the age of 10 to 13. And I, while working at a hospital in a city, was asked to go on a blind date and met Graham. And then when I found out he had a race car, I thought, well, this is probably worth pursuing here. So that was an absolute great opportunity. I'd grown up on a rural property. We had hail, drought, bushfires, everything that could wipe you out. And so when my husband and I decided to build this nursery called Withcott Seedlings, I was insistent and persistent that we had to protect ourselves from the Australian environment. And we went on to convert this 60-acre dry clay and sandstone hill into a highly productive area that we started with $800 and a few seedlings in our backyard, and that built up to over 25, 26 years, 250 staff, $21 million value, our own in-house school, our own transport company. Whenever a supplier failed to do something to our standard, we'd set that company up and we'd do it ourselves. The other fantastic opportunity I had was to raise my children at work with me. It was so much fun for me. Wherever I was working, in Australia or around the world, I'd take my children. And now to see my daughter at 27, she's got 27 countries on her passport, is just such a buzz. I'm still a little nervous about overseas travel. She doesn't even think twice about it. And that makes me so proud as a parent that my kids had a pretty rough time growing up. It would be up to them a lot of the time to have dinner on the table at 7 o'clock when we came in. We often did 16-hour days, 7 days a week. And I'll never forget one meal that they made when we come in. They were very young, and we come in and they'd busted up a lettuce and they'd put green and red jelly on it. And that was dinner. They thought that was a great dinner. Sharing knowledge is a huge thing. I have an absolute passion for motorsport. We raced cars for many years along with our business, and at one stage we had to change from using methanol fuel to unleaded fuel, which led to 3 engines blowing up in our shed. Now, I'm not a mechanic, but I have a good understanding of data analysis and that I've developed over the time. So what I did, because we had fuel-injected computerised systems on the car, I was able to write simple software which allowed us to, at the racetrack, download data in 45 seconds and retune the engine so that the engine wouldn't detonate. It mightn't have given the peak performance, but at least it didn't blow up. And we then went on to win 3 Australian titles, which we did. And the message in that picture is, sometimes things don't go quite to plan, but you have to be prepared for whatever could happen. Thank you.
Thanks for the intros and so on earlier on. I consider myself a pracademic. I've been in academia a short while, and prior to that, I was in the corporate business. So I used to just have to follow rules. I was fortunate that I often used to make those rules, but I always had a boss. And I always just share this looking at managers survive, leaders innovate. And don't want to put people off, but people just generally tend to think that, hey, I don't want to work for a boss. I don't want to go into a corporate. I want to run my own business because I want to be my own boss. And the first thing I say to people with that is, well, you're totally wrong. If you go into business on your own, believe me, you have more bosses. The bank is your boss. Your wife or your husband is your boss. All your suppliers are your bosses because you're going to owe them all money. So it's actually, to go into business on your own is a lot more challenging than working for a business. Okay? The only problem is if you work for a business, you have to get in at 8, you have to leave at 5, and there are rules and policies and procedures. May not be good for all. So guys, I have given a handout. I don't want to go into this too much depth. You can read through it. And generally what I'm talking about is where we look at the difference between survival and market leadership strategies. I was fortunate to go through a lot of this curve, working for 2 distinct different kinds of industries in my working career. The first one was, I was a sales director for a company called GlaxoSmithKline. It's the 2nd largest pharmaceutical company in the world. And GlaxoSmithKline is a very corporate, a solid corporate institution, and based upon sound principles, rules, policies, and procedures. It's all about meetings, all about the way to do things, and a very good foundation. I then changed industries and went and worked for Sony International, is where we launched Sony Playstations. I shared this with some of our Michigan students. It must have been about 15 Christmases ago. And I was in that business for about 10 years. And that was a radical move because it was about entertainment. It was about these weird, strange people playing video games. Not sure why they called it video games, but that's what it was. And these were very creative games that took it to a new dimension. Basically what we did at PlayStation was we brought the video arcade into your lounge. So we closed traditional businesses. Sega at that stage owned the market. Sony closed Sega down. They were nasty, so we decided to take them out of the market. And what this actually did was leadership strategies. We had to define new markets, new users for something that didn't exist before, and doing things in a total different way. So there was a lot of risk involved, and we refer to a lot of what happened there as corporate entrepreneurship. So in other words, entrepreneurship within a larger corporate setting, and innovation. Going through to a leadership strategy, in essence what I say is the world is now about survival. So if you do have a competitive advantage today, in all likelihood, that competitive advantage within the next month will be obsolete. So you have to reinvent yourself the whole time. At Swinburne, we've got a world-renowned program called the Master of Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and I was fortunate to lead that program for a number of years, and Anton's actually leading that program at the moment. And we teach a lot of these skills for entrepreneurs. It's one of the unique programs in the world that teaches entrepreneurs, not people that want to be entrepreneurs, but people that are entrepreneurs, and how to get ahead and become not that survivalist, but that leadership strategist. In essence, a lot of people believe that if you have technology innovation and you have a technology, you can have a competitive advantage. It's actually incorrect. Because of the technological advancements that we have nowadays, it doesn't last long for somebody to either imitate you or someone to do it better than you are doing. So you have to reinvent yourself the whole time. What's going around in the innovation space now, some of you may be familiar with the term, is a thing called, is that green, Rosemary? The term open innovation. Open innovation is where you collaborate with your partners, you collaborate with suppliers. Very importantly, you collaborate with your competitors. You don't do that and don't know what they're doing. You may not be a competitor anymore, and you may be a business that's exiting. Over and above what with the handout I gave you, I just want to mention a handful of things that I find that are usually in consulting terms and so on go through, and for the entrepreneurship students we teach. And I'm just going to list them very briefly for you. Find new ways to improve customer satisfaction. Find opportunities through understanding trends of change, because that's where the innovation comes in, and delivering new solutions to clients, to customers. Develop the ability to move quickly. The ability to surprise, because if you have an innovative audience, they want to see new stuff. Shift the rules of the game. So traditional MBA students, break the rules, go outside the square. Invest in strategic market communication. People think that social media is the way to go. It most certainly is, but it is not a substitute for traditional marketing media. And last but not least, attack with several competitive weapons simultaneously. And that is where we say business plans, ladies and gentlemen, are obsolete. The new way to go is an evolving business plan where you change your business plan daily. Thank you very much.
Anton's original background was as a research scientist in the South African nuclear energy and electro-optics industry. So you'll hear more of his story now. Please welcome Anton.
Good afternoon, people, and thank you very much for that introduction. Just to prove to you that I actually worked in the nuclear industry, you can turn off the lights and you'll see I'll green, I'll glow. Wendy mentioned a very interesting thing when she started this morning. She talked about, she said, as an entrepreneur or any person in business, you are actually you yourself is the biggest tool that you can use. Now, I've never come to that realization, so I think it's great. Thanks for that, Wendy. I must say my wife sometimes calls me the tool man, but I never made that connection. So as most of you will know, innovation itself is a tool that entrepreneurs use to exploit opportunities. It is a tool that some people like Peter Drucker say it is a discipline that is worth learning and practicing. Of course, within the discipline of innovation, there are many different individual innovation tools, hundreds, if not thousands of tools. Things such as Brainstorming is a very familiar concept that everybody knows and probably use. There's things such as the voice of the customer, design for manufacturing, stage gate processes, and I think we can go on. There's lots of them, just to name but a few. So how do we define it? And we say an innovation tool is really, it's anything that qualifies as a structured aid. A structured aid, whether it be managerial or technical in nature, doesn't matter. As soon as the aim of it is to improve the efficiency or the effectiveness of the innovation process, then we've got a tool. Now, that brings us to a dilemma, and I use the word structured. So structured, maybe I'll just explain. When tool developers, when they develop or they invent new tools, they normally base it or underpin it on theory, and then they come and they give us some guidelines, some steps to follow, and they say, if you want to use this tool, this is how you do it. Sort of, if you like, they give us a tool manual, very boring. Now, the problem with that is in innovation, we know is a creative process, and together with that, we associate the characteristics of innovation is flexibility, the freedom to experiment. It's ambiguous, lots of iteration taking place, going forward and backwards. So yeah, all those things. So my dilemma is, how do we marry the word structured on the one hand with all these characteristics of creativity on the other hand, right? And if I can take it further then, how do we actually teach innovation tools in our business programs, right? So what I'm going to share with you here is a 4-category schema. Now, the first one that you can see, it is reconstruction. Now, this is when the adopter redesigns a tool from scratch. And in the process, taking maybe concepts from one tool, from another tool, and combining it into a new tool. Now, why would people do that in the first place? There's several motivations. You may be unhappy or unsatisfied with the original tool. It's not exactly what you want. You may think that if you design the tool yourself, it can be done faster and quicker. It will have more flexibility, perhaps, than if you buy something off the shelf. And some people actually suffer from the syndrome that we call the not invented here syndrome, right? Just to give you an example, one of the companies that we interviewed adopted Cooper's famous stage gate process. They took aspects of open innovation and they built it into the fuzzy front end of the innovation process. And also they borrowed aspects of concurrent engineering. They brought it into this. So what they had there was then a template that could govern the further development of the new projects. The next one is what we call customization, and that is when at the outset people say, well, I've got a tool here now, I've developed it, but it actually doesn't suit my circumstances very well, my particular contingency of my company. And then they make modifications to the tool. Again, relating it to our particular stage gate process, what this company realized is that they needed a phase right at the end where you introduce products into the market. They added it on in the process, customizing it. Then we move on to our third one, which is evolution. And this happens as the company over time, if they start using the tool, they repeat it for different projects, and every time they learn something new, they find some new features that they want to add, and over time this tool evolves into something much better, much suitable for the company. The final one is actually reinterpretation, and that happens when over time people reuse the tool, but they know it so well that because of certain projects, such as incremental innovation projects, that don't require all the steps to be followed in detail, these people can actually short step or take shortcuts, and that is perfectly fine. I mean, if you've got a radical project, yes, absolutely go through all the stages, all the activities to make sure you don't miss anything. Right, so where does it leave us? In terms of teaching innovation tools, the main approach is to contrast the common viewpoint that if you use a tool, it is simply a straightforward, mechanical, all or nothing process. Just here's the tool book, just go and implement it. No, we say look at how the practitioners, how they actually go about it. Do adopt tools, adapt them so it fits your circumstances. And we encourage that for our students. In the process, we like to liken practitioners that use innovation tools with jazz musicians. You've seen jazz musicians, they never follow the actual written sheet music. They show their skills by improvising and come up with something better that pleases the audience. And in similar way, I say, you as product innovators, use the tools skillfully, adapt them when necessary, so that in the end, hopefully, you can give the customers what they want. Thank you very much.
And you might have picked up that Wendy did provide a supply chain strategy in her presentation. You did. If you listen, she talked about having problems with suppliers, so she just decided to do it herself. One approach. And I think it's a case that in a lot of businesses, in entrepreneurial ventures, you're not thinking about your supply chain. And it may be the nature of the business, it's not as critical a focus if you're maybe an IT startup, maybe a restaurant. But you really should take some focus and some time to look at it. What a lot of people tend up doing is buying, and usually buying at list price, retail price. So you should have somebody, at least as part of their job, even if supply chain isn't critical, taking a look at what you're doing and move towards procurement rather than just buying, looking at what suppliers you should have, what sort of contracts and details you should use. To provide something maybe more valuable than what an academic normally would do, and rather than researching articles, I decided to talk to one of our alumni from our supply chain program who's been very entrepreneurial and involved in a number of startups. And I'm going to pull some of his knowledge and share that with you because I think that's very practical. He was working for an electric vehicle startup called Bright Automotive. What was interesting with the Bright Automotive venture is they were promoting a service van electric vehicle, hybrid vehicle. And so different than a lot of startups, they were going to get into producing automotive and truck vehicles. And so the supply chain was very critical and was going to be a big challenge. And so for a student who graduated not that long ago, had a little experience at Chrysler and some other companies, he was charged with developing the supply chain and developing the supply chain organization. And I think the first thing that was his big challenge is we don't have anything. We don't have any procedures, any documents, any contracts. And so in developing the supply chain, one of the challenges, he said, is when you're trying to get talent and hire talent, you really don't have the name recognition. You know, who is this company? Who is this startup? The other thing in the automotive and vehicle business, he pointed out you have to be careful on who you're hiring. If you hired somebody that maybe had 20 years of experience in the automotive business, they may bring the right or the incorrect perspective to things. If you know anything about the automotive industry and procurement, the big auto companies really can beat on suppliers and dictate terms. And in a new venture startup like Bright Automotive, it's totally the opposite situation. So you have to be careful in building that team that you have people with the right experience, not the wrong experience. The other interesting thing he said, and I think it makes some sense, is you want to hire quickly and fire quickly. And in that new starting up venture, you really don't have the time to develop talent. You'd like to, but you really can't do that. So you need to get somebody on board, hire them, work with them, see if they're working out. If they're not working out, it's in everybody's best interest to move on. So it's a little bit tough message, but I think pretty good. When working with potential suppliers, it's really not about contracts and terms and conditions. It was really about building relationships. And the interesting perspective he had is that cost should be probably priority number 5. It's really you want partners versus just suppliers. And as you said, conversations instead of contracts. The other thing is that the strategy needed to be very simple, a one-page strategy, really focusing on the make or buy decision. How are we going to make that decision about making or buying? Have it clear so that everybody understands that going forward. Another key thing is really understanding the product. So you have to get that product knowledge of the new product to be effective in the supply chain. And another point that I thought was very good that he made in our conversations was that supply chain alignment was critical, that you really have to have that supply chain and that strategy aligned with the business. And as he pointed out, supply chain really is a boundary spanning operation. So internal problems that you might have in your startup venture can leak out into your supply chain. Also, the external problems in the supply chain can infect your operations. And kind of as a closing observation, in the Bright Automotive new startup, while it wasn't successful, one of the things that he thought was very good is that they had 100% transparent communications, all right? For example, every week they would report their cash flow position. And what he found is that open environment, it avoided a lot of the water cooler type conversations, a lot of the rumors and innuendo, so being very open in that environment worked very well. So as a takeaway, the supply chain is going to be important to different levels, but in any startup venture, it's something that should be considered. I think you tend to look too much to sometimes the customer and the products, but you have to look at where that supply is coming from, and it's very important in terms of helping you preserve the cash flow. Thank you.
You want to make sure that you don't get so deep into the data that you miss the forest for the trees. Be able to step back and look at the big picture. Understand systems. How do things relate to each other? Whether these are capital systems or manufacturing systems, how do the general systems themselves operate? Everybody's going to have technical skills. As an entrepreneur, you're probably going to be a relative expert in some particular area. You need to maintain those critical skills. Additionally, you have to resource. So you've got time, funds, all of these have to be resourced and allocated, whether you're a leader or an entrepreneur. You have to be able to apply them when and where needed, and you have to consider second and third order effects, because some of what you do is going to have unintended consequences, and your ability to think through those is going to make you better. You have to be able to synchronize all of the resources at your command, and you have to be able to orchestrate. So what's the difference? Well, Anton used a musical analogy earlier, so I'm going to use the same. Music is mathematical in nature, all right? So why is it an art then and not a science? A composer puts notes down on a score, but the conductor brings that score to life and makes it the art, and that's what you have to be able to do. That's the art of the whole thing. So is there a difference? I would say yes, there is. Entrepreneurs need to be leaders, but not all leaders are going to be entrepreneurs. So some people aren't willing to take those risks that are necessary to get out there and be an entrepreneur, but they're perfectly comfortable within an established structure to continue to move forward with the organization. So, hopefully, you can draw your own conclusions on whether there's a difference, but I would say that, yeah, there probably is.
All right, so Chicago's over in Illinois, not Michigan. All right, so what happens is you have Chicago over here, you have Lake Michigan, and then you have Michigan, and you have Detroit. Kalamazoo is a small entity that's halfway in between Chicago and Detroit. All right, so if you have the mitten, all right, you have Detroit and you have Kalamazoo. And the reason why I bring that up is because my talk is going to be at the community level in terms of building an ecosystem with a startup. All the other people have talked about in terms of individual entrepreneurs as well as how corporations can be entrepreneurial is how I'd explain it. And so what you're seeing now around the world is how do people actually build a Silicon Valley? How do you build in Austin, Texas, where I grew up? How do you build a Boulder, Colorado, where I spent 9 years? And how do you make Kalamazoo a vibrant, energetic startup community? And why do we care about building startup communities? Think about the energy that new companies bring to where you live. Think about the innovation that comes out of new companies as opposed to existing companies or corporations. Think about the jobs that come from new companies that actually are growing. And where they're finding in the United States, where jobs come from, are those new firms that grow quickly. And so that's why people are really caring about how to build a startup community. And it's not about building another Silicon Valley. It's about building a Melbourne, for example, that has a lot of startup energy. It's about building Kalamazoo, which has about 150,000 to 250,000 people in it, to really look at the new companies, basically support the entrepreneurs so they can actually build those companies that then provide you jobs. And so you see the same thing in the culture here in Melbourne. Melbourne has about 4 million people, a little bit different than Kalamazoo. Austin has about 1.2 million people. When I grew up there, it was about 350,000. And Boulder has about 250,000. But you can actually use that culture in terms of values and beliefs to make it a successful startup community. Now, which players are in a startup community? Who does it involve? It involves universities. It involves investors, mentors, service providers, government, and corporations. They all have to be involved with the entrepreneurs. Now, who should lead the charge to build that startup community? Should it be government that provides aid to get your venture off the ground? Should it be the universities that provide students that can come be employees in your new venture? Or actually those students that can actually be the entrepreneur themselves? Or should it be the corporations that basically can sponsor Startup Weekend? I mean, my focus is on high tech. But in Kalamazoo, I think there's actually 4 startup communities. One is health services. We have Stryker. Anyone heard of Stryker? Anyone heard of Pfizer or Upjohn? Right? What happens is those corporations can help spin off innovations that can be new companies. They can also provide research labs that new startups can use. You have service providers that can help entrepreneurs in terms of accountancy, lawyers, marketing, and PR. You have investors that can provide money into those startups to help them get off the ground after they bootstrap for a couple of years. But should any one of those entities actually lead the charge for a startup community to build it? Or should it be the entrepreneurs that lead it? Now, a colleague of mine, Brad Feld, out of Boulder, Colorado, wrote a book called Startup Communities. And he's come up with what he calls the Boulder Thesis. And there's 4 points that he argues in regards to why entrepreneurs should be the leaders. Not government, not universities, not investors or service providers. Those are feeders to the entrepreneurs into the entrepreneurial ecosystem or startup community. Entrepreneurs need to lead that because does anyone know what the word entrepreneur came from? It's a French derivative of entrepreneur, which means to undertake or to do things. No longer should you be talking or about doing things, you should be actually doing it, and entrepreneurs are the ones that actually get out and do it. The second thing is, okay, entrepreneurs need to take a long-term commitment to it. Long-term is not 3 to 4 or 5 years like you see with politicians, right? Because they actually have their roles change. I mean, in the United States, the president can change every 8 years or every 4 years. But entrepreneurs can be there for 20 years, and that's what you mean by long-term commitment. The third thing, all right, is entrepreneurs are open. We talk about sharing knowledge. And when an entrepreneur comes in and builds a startup community, you actually are able to collaborate more, have cross-pollination that leads to innovation. And you have to include everybody, inclusive in terms of investors, universities, government, the service providers. And fourth, what happens is you have to continually engage with the entire stack, which includes all those feeders in there. For example, all right, I've started Pitch Zoo in Kalamazoo, which is going on while I'm talking here back in Kalamazoo. And so what happens is entrepreneurs see a gap and they try to fill it. And so the Boulder Thesis basically says that entrepreneurs should lead. They should be long-term in their commitments. They should be open, including everybody that wants to be involved in it. Not exclusive, but inclusive. And fourth, they need to continually be involved with the community and engage the entire stack. Now, my question to you is, why shouldn't entrepreneurs lead the building of a startup community? Thanks.
The chap with the beanie, that's great, the black beanie.
This is more to all of you, but I was wondering if you as an individual notice the positive effect you have on a business growth and success. I joined the business course I'm doing at the moment because I felt if I was to be employed in a business and be able to see the own effects I have on that business and the success I push it towards, that would be a very, very satisfying career for me. Well, do you feel the same way?
At the present role that Alex and myself are in lecturing entrepreneurship and innovation, we design most of our assessment items in our programs, in our courses, very hands-on, where students actually go out and work in business and apply the theory that they learn in the assignments, and they spend time with companies and they write reports that they actually present to management. And of course we guide them and we mentor them through the process. So the feedback that we get often is quite good. The management like this free information that they're getting from students in terms of the latest theories and tools that's available in the marketplace. So I think, I wish to think that we are contributing to the success of businesses in our region.
It's on? Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, I applaud you for getting involved with startups. I mean, it's an uncertain environment. Now, one of the benefits, though, that you get is you're actually able to provide a greater value than if you're working with a corporation. So that's great. In terms of answering the question, do I see a value of getting involved? I get involved as a mentor, and I take the attitude that you give before you get. And so there's a difference between being a mentor versus an advisor. An advisor is going to take a fee up front, and then it's actually going to then provide the value. And if you want, in my perspective, a startup community to grow, you actually have to have more mentors than you have advisors. And so you take that attitude to where, okay, I'm going to give something and then maybe get something, but that's not the reason why I'm getting involved. I'm getting involved because I want to see things prosper. An example is I actually work with a couple of students that are actually building a mobile app, and they were having difficulty in finding co-founders that were of the nature of software developers. And so they didn't know how to approach software developers. They had the business idea, but didn't necessarily have the expertise. And so I'm able to come in and then put them in contact with others and then watch them get excited when the application gets to be deployed. And then they become, good friends with one another. And so you've actually provided benefit to both of them. And that's just fun to watch from a mentor's perspective.
Has there ever been a point during your career when you realized you had been working in the wrong direction for a substantial amount of time, where maybe you wasted a lot of time and you realized afterwards that it was a bad move?
And after about 20 years working in corporate, I had a few life-changing things and exited the corporate world. But it wasn't a waste of time. It taught me. There were things I learned in the corporate environment which were the foundations which I've taken on hopefully for the rest of my life. So in answering the question, had I had it over again, I would never have gone into corporate. But in retrospect, I learned such good things from it that I use that as a foundation going ahead. So I don't think anything in life, to me, it's the university of life. So I don't think you really, in regret that, the only thing I regret is having an ex-wife. But we won't go there. but other than that, the good thing out of that is she gave me some good kids. So it's always an experience. But I think we learn from those things, and if I may just then bring out what I'm actually trying to get at, from an entrepreneurship perspective, in our degrees we believe there's no such thing as entrepreneurs failing. Their ventures may fail, but because they're in high-risk environments, things aren't always going to pan out like you want them to. Therefore, you learn from failure and you move on.
Somebody once told me, and this kind of just reinforces what the gentleman said, is nobody's worthless. You can always be used as a bad example. And when I first retired from the military, I also went into work in a large corporation, specifically in the automotive industry. And I think my wife can attest that that was definitely the wrong direction for me, because I was absolutely miserable while I was working there. And within 2 years, I realized this isn't going to work, and went and came up to the university. But again, I was able to draw on a lot of things, and there were a lot of bad examples that I continue to use now, and helps me understand why I'm going in certain directions.
Thank you, sir.
I want to steal John's thunder. We've had some discussions in the apartment, and John has an interesting view of how long do you continue to do something, and John says, as long as you're having fun and learning something. And I think that's really true. I started off as an engineer. I'm a recovering engineer. Working for a defense contractor, after about 5 years, I said, okay, that's not really where I want to be. And it took a little while to disengage and move into something else. And while I was doing that, I got an engineering license, but I was trying to always learn, and I don't regret that motion, that change, and being at a couple different schools. I think the point is, you go down a path, and if you start to decide, I think as John says, you're not having fun or you're not learning something, then you need to make the choice and to move on. But I wouldn't regret what you've done, but don't stay in something for 10 years if you're not meeting those two criteria.
You often don't know what you've learned until you've actually moved on. When I finished my general nurses training, I chose to go to a psychiatric hospital to further my training, and that was, I look back now and I learnt so much there about care and compassion for people, but then also how institutionalised staff can create a toxic work environment. And I have never forgotten that, and it gave me so many areas in my future business career where I had to make a decision. I could base it on, do I want to be compassionate or do I want to be toxic? I often do, it's either A or it's B. And you know, when you can make a compassionate decision which then energises people, that makes you profit.
In the US, how many people actually are an entrepreneur and an academic at the same time, as in owning a business, managing a business, and having an academic, making an academic contribution?
I'm a rookie at this. So I've only been in academia for 1 year officially, and then was a doctoral student for 4 years. So some people would say that's also academia. Some people say it's slave labor. Right? So it is not looked upon favorably in the United States. It is actually something that is thought of as detrimental to your academic career. And however, I take a different view of that. And so as an entrepreneur by background, I don't necessarily care about that, but it makes it more difficult for me to work with my colleagues. But my personality helps with that, as I'm a nice person, so that kind of helps.
I can attest he's a nice person.
I say that is a true perception, that a lot of times, and we're from the business school, that unfortunately you're too focused on doing things research academically and not as involved in business. I like where we are at Western because I've had the opportunity to be involved with business and with our alumni and our students, and I think that's critical. And I imagine that there's going to be a bit of a change as college gets more expensive. If you're trying to educate students and you're very removed from the real world environment, that's going to be harder and harder to sustain. So I'm thinking maybe in 10 years from now, we're going to see more push to have that experience out there, being maybe a consultant or maybe having your side business, and the challenge of bringing that back into some research and the teaching. But hopefully we're making that move that direction.
I have a question. It's basically a advice type question. I'm a student and I also run 2 businesses and I work. And a lot of times people tell me that I'm doing too much, or I should fully dedicate myself to academics. But I do believe my businesses deserve my full dedication. What type of advice would you have? Like, where should I give my time at? Is a degree really, a degree is important to me, but my businesses deserve my full dedication. So what type of advice would you have?
I was very fortunate that I managed to get to where I am now without any academic structure behind me at all. Totally focused for 26 years just on a business and the people around me. But I've learned over the years, and the messages here again and again, I'm just sitting here giggling under my breath to myself here. There's so much of what these other gentlemen have said are things I struggled with over the years. Wow, if I could have gone to a leadership entrepreneurial school and just been given that opportunity, wow, that's a concept. And had taken time to consider how that could be applied, again, A or B, how much more I could have fast-tracked things in my career. So it's a hard decision, but for me, what feels right for you, do it. Right. And if you're enjoying it, do it. And also mix it up a bit. Okay. I'm a person who will totally throw my energy into one thing for 3 months. And by the end of that time, I'd have a group of people ready to continue that on because I'm already moved on to the next thing. So, if it feels right for you, do it.
I'll be very quick on that. I'm not going to be sexist. What are females very good at? Multitasking.
Yeah.
Answer to your question, as an entrepreneur, do it all.
Well, that's what I'm doing now. So
If I can also just add something, I think you have the best of both worlds at the moment. You're getting the academic underpinning that you need in business, and many of our students come back and they say they've made mistakes, and had they known this and this and this, probably they wouldn't have made the same mistakes. You will still go out and make mistakes, but yeah, it's very good to get your education, and because you're an entrepreneur, you don't have to sleep, so work on your business as well.
I don't sleep.
Just with that huge company that you built, did you seek out advice from other people along the way? Did you have an advisory board, or did you really just go with your own, instincts and knowledge and do what you thought would work out the best?
My husband and I are dramatically different personality types. I'm very systematic and more introvert. He is the big, out there, customer-focused person, and we're both very innovative, though. Me, business systems innovation and software, him, engineering. So you put the two together, you can fast-track projects incredibly quickly. And we just trusted each other to do what we did every day. And then our time out was squeezing in motorsport wherever we could around the country at the same time. So, it was 2001, there was a dramatic change in my life when my father passed away. And I actually did at that point seek some external help. And that bit of external help I got was understanding personality types, which incredibly fast-tracked so many projects we had within the business, from innovation to commercialisation, because we then knew to put the right people in the right spot. I wish I'd done that 20 years prior.
Got time just for one last question, I think up in the back corner there.
How do you find yourself looking for opportunities in those bleaker years when there are recessions or lack of investment opportunities?
Well, first of all, my question back to you is, where does opportunity come from?
Adversity.
So if we have no adversity, we have no opportunity. Okay, so during a downturn, there's a lot of adversity, right? So there should be more opportunity in those time periods. So you actually can go back and look at research in the United States and see that firms that were started in the Great Depression in the 1930s are actually still around. Now, the failure rate of new firms within 6 years is roughly about 66 to 70%, depending on which country you're looking at. And so if you start a business during the hard times and you're able to be successful, you've actually created a knowledge base that allows you to go through the good times as well. So there's always a good time to start, and that's now.